The Riverman, flowing with the cycles of life. Let us continue our shamanic journey together with the story of the Riverman, which has been passed down in my family for many generations. A long time ago, in the beginning of the Second Mayan Empire, there lived a young man who, as the world would have it, fell in love with a beautiful young woman. Unfortunately, this was a time in Mayan history when many of the people harbored a great deal of superstition in their hearts, were fanatical about their religious ideas, and because of this they wrongly felt it was necessary to sacrifice other humans in order to appease the gods. The young man didn't care for any of that religion or superstition, so he chose to leave the religious fanatics alone and spend all his free time with his beloved. Their love was true love. One day he returned home to learn that his beloved had been selected to be a sacrifice for the gods, and the priests had come and taken her away. The young man went running to the temple where the sacrifices were performed, but he was too late. Lying on the altar with her heart removed, he found his beloved. Grief-stricken, he sank to the floor and wept. Anger grew within him. He was upset at the world. He was mad at God. He was mad at his fellow villagers. He saw they were lost in their superstition and were killing each other due to their fanatical beliefs. He left the village and went to live alone in the jungle. Because his anger and grief were so strong, he rarely ate or slept, and slowly he began to die. Finally, he decided to end his life. He went to the rushing river and jumped in, swimming to the bottom in hopes the river would drown him. As he sank down, he had a vision of his beloved. Overjoyed by the sight of her, he called out, "My beloved, I have found you. I'm so sorry for what those fanatics did to you, and that I was not there to protect you. I am going to stay here with you forever. I will never leave you again." And then the spirit of his beloved said to him gently, "You cannot stay with me, nor will you ever see me again if you continue on this path. You are full of hate, but I am full of love. To be where I am now, you need to stop living in the pain of the past. As long as you hold resentments, you are giving your power away, and you cannot be where I am." Those warnings from his beloved startled him, and he awoke to find himself on the side of the river, gasping for breath. He felt the truth of her words, and realized the joy of living he had once felt was now gone. It had been replaced by fear and hate. This realization was the moment of his transformation, and he said to himself, "Freedom is within me." He looked up to the moon and knew that his beloved was there watching him, guiding him. His heart began to open up once again, and he started to forgive the fanaticism of the people. He looked at the beauty of the river in front of him, and saw it as a symbol of flowing love. In that moment he became known as the Riverman, the wise person of the jungle. At about the same time, and thousands of miles away across the ocean, a great man of integrity lived in Spain. A soldier by trade, he was known as the Good Conquistador, because he had devoted his life to the Queen of Spain and service to his country. He was a faithful, loyal subject who always acted with integrity and never abused his power, and that was why all the people, including the Queen, loved him so much. She honored him and asked him to travel to the New World. When he arrived in the New World, he saw right away that the other conquistadores had gone mad with greed and were abusing, torturing, and killing the Mayans in their search for gold. This included killing many of the family and friends of the Riverman. The Good Conquistador was horrified by their actions. A pious man, he tried to talk to his fellow conquistadores to convince them to act honorably, but they would not listen. Finally, he said, "This is not the will of God. This is the abuse of God, the corrupting of God, and I will take no part in it." So he laid down his sword, took his armor off, and fled into the jungle. Before long, he was captured by the Mayans. They began torturing him, punishing him for the sins of the other soldiers, and kept him as their captive. The Riverman, who had often come to the village to help take care of his people, came upon the imprisoned conquistador. Although they could not speak the same language, the Riverman felt the vibration of this beautiful man and knew his heart was pure. The Riverman freed the Good Conquistador and brought him to his home in the jungle, fed him, and they began to learn each other's languages. The Good Conquistador was astonished by the Riverman's kindness and inner peace. Once they had been together long enough to understand each other, he asked, "How did you learn all this knowledge? I can feel God in you." "God is in everyone," the Riverman responded, "but sometimes you have to look harder to see him." He told the conquistador the story of his beloved, her sacrifice, and what happened to him in the river. The conquistador said to him, "Teach me to be like you." "It begins with understanding," the Riverman explained. "When you look at both our peoples, they are the same. They want happiness, but they create suffering instead. We have found peace between us, you and me. We have communicated heart to heart. When every action we take comes from the heart, we end the suffering in our lives." This beautiful story holds many lessons central to the shamanic path: the importance of forgiveness, the dangers of fanaticism, recognizing the addiction to suffering, and the power of unconditional love. One teaching in this story that can often go overlooked regards the cyclical nature of life and time. Many of us have grown up in a culture that sees human progress as linear, each generation as better than the previous one, and ourselves as evolved and therefore more intelligent. But that is not how the ancient shamans viewed the world. In the introduction, I explained that the shamans were dream masters. This also means they understood the illusion of time, and knew time to be cyclical rather than linear. Nature abounds with cycles. Day turns to night and night to day. The seasons cycle from one to the next. The earth cycles around the sun, as the moon cycles around the earth. Waves rise from the ocean, crash and cascade, and return to the ocean again. The shamans saw these great cycles and realized that time also runs in the same way. For instance, the Toltecs believe that we are living in the fifth world age. What this means is that the world has been built and destroyed 4 previous times, and we have gone through a cycle of both destruction and recreation each time. Everything in the world, from trees to oceans to people, has been destroyed and recreated 4 times. What's incredibly interesting to note is that halfway around the world in India, the ancient Vedic tradition also teaches that we are now in the fifth world age. What a strange coincidence it is for 2 different cultures and different hemispheres to come to the same conclusion. Whether or not you believe this is literally true isn't as important as understanding the deeper truth this worldview is pointing to. All of life, not just the seasons and the tides, runs in cycles. When we view life as cyclical rather than linear, we can see the futility of trying to control the tides of life. When we are aware that all things will collapse, alter, and change, we don't try and hold on to them as tightly. Trying to control things and keep them as they are only causes suffering. The shaman knows that things come, and you let them come, and things go, and you let them go. This doesn't mean that the shaman doesn't work to change things when he can, but it does mean we don't fight or needlessly spend energy on things we cannot change. Instead, the shaman goes with the flow and cycle of life. Both the good conquistador and the riverman experience the cyclical nature of time and reality, or what is commonly called the triumphs and tragedies of life. The riverman began his story by falling in love, but then losing his beloved to violence. The good conquistador would also experience triumph and tragedy cases. When they finally accepted and dealt with the collapse of their old dreams, it allowed room for a new life grounded in wisdom. Their experiences changed them for the better, but it wasn't until they surrendered to life rather than fighting it that they received the benefit. Of course, this is easier said than done, and that is what makes the riverman's story so powerful. Almost all of us have experienced loss in our lives, even if few of us have experienced that loss in such a traumatic way. Because of this, we can understand the riverman's initial reaction of anger, hatred, and grief, as many of us would have reacted in a similar fashion. Yet it was the vision of his beloved that helped him find his way back to truth, and the key to doing so was forgiveness and unconditional love. Embracing both of these allowed him to let go of the emotional poison he was carrying inside himself and align with the cycles of life. The result was he found his own personal freedom. The same is true in our own lives. When we forgive others, we free ourselves from the burden of negativity and resentment. When we step into the river of unconditional love, we are now going with the flow of life rather than swimming against the current. In the Toltec tradition, we have a very powerful tool, the Toltec inventory and recapitulation, to help us forgive and release any emotional poison we are carrying from past experiences. I've included an exercise on these powerful practices at the end of this chapter. Think about the tragedies you have experienced in life. After some time has passed, are you able to look back and see them as part of the cycles of life? Were there also gifts that came to you as a result of those tragedies? Recognizing the gifts that grow from a tragedy doesn't mean you would have chosen this event, but it shows you now have a deeper understanding of the cycles of love and life. When a dream we have collapses, as all dreams ultimately do, the best thing we can do for ourselves and the world is to step into the river of unconditional love and go with the flow of life. No one said the path of the shaman would be easy, and aligning with life, even in the face of tragedy, often takes all the courage we can muster. This doesn't mean we won't experience the normal feelings of sadness and grief. We share them as much as we need to, but at some point after the event, we can choose to let go of these events rather than allowing them to consume us and keep us in a personal hell of suffering. Attachment and the addiction to suffering. The Mayan priests and the other conquistadores also have a lesson for us. Be wary of your attachment to beliefs and ideas. The Mayans sacrificed the riverman's beloved out of superstition and religious fanaticism, thinking they were doing the will of their gods. The conquistadores killed the Mayans in their pursuit of material possessions, another form of fanaticism. In both cases, these groups took actions that produced great suffering. But here is the important part. Both were convinced that their ideas and beliefs were the correct ones. Just as the Mayan priests killed the riverman's beloved, the conquistadores pillaged the Mayan villages and killed many people, both of which were due to fanatical thinking, the madness of extremism in their beliefs. In my brother Don Miguel Ruiz's first book, The 5 Levels of Attachment, he uses the wisdom of our family's tradition to explain the dangers of corrupting your own personal dream through attachment. Many people are wary of becoming too attached to money or material possessions, but these are all secondary attachments. The primary attachments we have are to our own beliefs and ideas, and they become potentially dangerous when we make them a part of our identity. When this happens, you can no longer see your belief as simply a belief, but as the way things really are. If you become this attached to a belief, and that belief is threatened, you can become fanatical about it. The truth is that beliefs and ideas only exist in one place, the human mind. They are not out there in the world, but rather the filter by which everything we perceive gets sorted. If left unchecked, they are how we can corrupt the world. Are there any areas of your life where you want to inflict your own beliefs on others? Do you try and control others? For instance, do you think the path of the shaman is the way for everyone? It isn't. Other people are on their own paths and moving through life in their own time and at their own pace. Attachment is a way in which the mind feeds its addiction to suffering. Both the Mayans and the conquistadores, through their own attachment and fanaticism, produced only suffering. The riverman, once his beloved was taken from him, chose suffering over peace for a long time, until the spirit of his beloved helped him to see another way to live. The Mayans who tortured the good conquistador were also trapped in the cycle of suffering. In the quest of what the mind believes is right, it will justify any action it needs to, no matter how much suffering. This addiction to suffering is part of the current dream of the planet. Until humans recognize the connection between attachment and addiction to suffering, we will continue to see the negativity that it produces. Terrorist attacks, mass shootings, wars, etc. are all examples of this. And until we as a species recognize the addiction to suffering, these situations will continue to resurface. That being said, it is still possible for us to see the beauty that coexists in the world, even at the same time that great suffering is present. In summary, when we try and fight the cyclical nature of life, we suffer. When we pull ourselves into alignment with life as it is happening, then we can move forward in love. Without awareness of our own beliefs, we can become lost in fanaticism, a product of fear and hate. When we hold on to our resentments and pain against others, we are the ones who suffer, because we have moved away from the peace of unconditional love. Exercises. Notice your own addiction. Most people cannot handle living in peace for very long. Instead, they look personal. It's just a condition of the human mind. The goal of the shaman is to see this tendency within, because awareness is the first step to change.